Well, here I am, Crix Tal of the Zephyrian Intelligence Corps, stuck in another one of these so-called elite tactical seminars aboard Station Nexus Prime. You know, the kind where everyone pretends they're the next great military genius while sipping overpriced synthetic caffeine. What a treat. The Academy's main amphitheater buzzed with the usual suspects. 36 of the galaxy's supposedly finest military minds, all crammed together like sardines in a pressure suit. Oh, the irony! To my left sat Commander Vex Han, a Drakmari warrior whose scales practically gleamed with arrogance. His species had conquered half their home system before they could even spell diplomacy, so naturally he thought he knew everything about warfare. Behind him, a cluster of Vorthan strategists huddled together, their forearms gesticulating wildly as they debated theoretical battle formations. Typical Vorthans, always planning, never doing. The real entertainment came from the Kelthaxian berserkers near the front row. These walking mountains of muscle and fury kept flexing their biceps every time someone mentioned ground combat. Subtlety, thy name is definitely not Kelthaxian. And then there was her, Amy Kowalski, human, sitting in the back corner like she was waiting for a transport shuttle instead of attending the most prestigious military seminar in 3 sectors. While everyone else had their data pads out, furiously taking notes and cross-referencing tactical databases, she just sat there. Occasionally, she'd jot down something on an actual paper notepad. Who uses paper anymore? Honestly, these humans and their primitive habits. The other attendees had already written her off, of course. I overheard Commander Vex Han earlier, snorting through his nasal slits about another weak human trying to play with the big boys. The Vorthans whispered among themselves, wondering why the Academy had even bothered inviting such an unremarkable specimen. Even the usually stoic Kelthaxians seemed amused by her presence, if their occasional chest thumping was any indication. I had to admit, she didn't look like much. Average height for a human, brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a standard Academy-issued jumpsuit that looked 2 sizes too big. No ceremonial armor, no species-specific weapons, no intimidating biomodifications. Just ordinary. Boring, really. Admiral Vashi strode into the room, and let me tell you, that was a sight to behold. 8 feet of pure Drakmari intimidation, with scales that had seen actual combat and scars that told stories of victories across multiple star systems. His voice could probably shatter reinforced titanium, and his presence made even the berserkers straighten up. "Welcome, candidates," Admiral Vashi rumbled, his words carrying the weight of 1,000 battlefield commands. "Today we will test your strategic thinking with scenarios that have broken lesser minds. These are not theoretical exercises, these are real battles that claimed real lives." He activated the holographic display, and suddenly we were staring at the siege of Korath Prime. A nightmare scenario where 50,000 defenders faced off against 500,000 attackers across a planetary surface with no hope of evacuation. The room erupted in animated discussion. Vorthan started calculating supply lines, Drakmari argued about defensive positions, and the Kelthaxians, well, they mostly suggested charging directly at the enemy. Standard operating procedure for their species. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone except Amy Kowalski, who continued to sit in her corner, occasionally glancing at the hologram, but showing about as much interest as someone watching paint dry on a humidity-controlled surface. "The key is controlling the high ground," declared Commander Vex Han, his scales rippling with confidence. "Nonsense," countered a Vorthan strategist named Kyuk Thar. "Resource management is the decisive factor in extended sieges." "You are both wrong," roared a Kelthaxian berserker. "Victory comes from the strength of warriors' hearts." And through it all, the human in the back just observed. Not even a raised eyebrow. Not a single comment or question. Just those dark eyes taking in every detail while her hand occasionally moved across that primitive paper notepad. I started to wonder if she was even paying attention, or if she was just doodling pictures of her lunch. How very human of her. Just when I thought this seminar couldn't get any more predictable, the main doors hissed open with all the drama of a plasma torpedo detonation. In walked Admiral Drohorn, And let me tell you, if Admiral Vashi was intimidating, Drawhorn was absolutely terrifying. This Vorthan War Master stood nearly 9 feet tall, his forearms moving with the fluid precision of someone who had personally strangled enemy commanders with his bare hands. The ceremonial battle scars across his chitinous exoskeleton told stories of victories that had shaped galactic politics. His compound eyes swept the room like targeting sensors, and I swear the temperature dropped 5 degrees. Admiral Vashi. Drawhorn's voice carried the authority of 1,000 conquered worlds. I hope you don't mind my unscheduled inspection. Of course not, Admiral Drawhorn, Vashi replied, though I caught the slight tremor in his usually rock-steady voice. We were just reviewing the Korath Prime scenario. Drawhorn's mandibles clicked in what I assumed was amusement. How quaint. Theoretical exercises for theoretical warriors. His 4 eyes focused on our group like we were specimens in a laboratory. I think these candidates need something more practical. Oh, wonderful. Nothing good ever started with a Vorthan War Master saying the word practical. Attention, candidates. Drawhorn's voice boomed across the amphitheater. We will now conduct live tactical exercises using real battle simulations. Your performance will be recorded and evaluated by the Galactic Defense Council. A failure here means failure in your military careers. The room erupted in nervous chatter. Real simulations meant actual consequences, actual casualties in virtual environments that felt completely real, and actual pain feedback systems. This wasn't a game anymore. You will be divided into 3 teams, Drawhorn continued, his arms gesturing to different sections of the room. Team leaders will be selected based on prior combat experience and tactical knowledge. Commander Tom Mali stepped forward first. A human, surprisingly, but one with an impressive service record from the Outer Rim conflicts. His jaw was set with the kind of determination that had probably gotten him through more than one impossible situation. General Krafnog rose next, all 8 feet of pure Kelthaxian muscle and attitude. His battle axe gleamed at his side, because of course he brought a battle axe to a tactical seminar. The berserkers around him roared approval, beating their chests like primitive drums. Then Judge Quintera gracefully stood, representing my own species with the kind of calculated elegance that made Zephyrians famous across the galaxy. Her crystalline features reflected the holographic displays, creating an almost hypnotic effect. Team selection begins now, Drawhorn announced. Leaders, choose your specialists. What followed was the most predictable draft in galactic history. Mali picked the experienced Drakmari warriors first. Krafnog grabbed his fellow berserkers. Quintera selected the tactical analysts and strategic planners. Everyone wanted the proven fighters, the decorated veterans, the specialists with impressive credentials. Amy Kowalski remained seated in her corner, watching the selection process with the same mild interest she'd shown during the earlier lecture. One by one, candidates were chosen until only a handful remained. And the human in the back, Mali finally said, almost as an afterthought, can handle logistics support for my team. Logistics support. The military equivalent of being asked to hold someone's coat during a fight. Amy simply nodded and made another note on her paper pad, as if being relegated to supply chain management was exactly what she'd expected. The first scenario materialized around us with stunning realism. Epler mining colony, a small civilian outpost on the edge of Vorthan space, under attack by the notorious Bloodfang pirate fleet. 27 enemy ships against our 3 defensive platforms and a handful of outdated patrol craft. The civilian population needed evacuation, but transport capacity was limited. It was, in military terms, completely hopeless. Team Mali deployed conventional defensive formations, concentrating firepower on the largest enemy vessels. Team Krafnog chose a direct assault strategy, because of course they did. Team Quintera opted for a fighting withdrawal, prioritizing civilian evacuation over tactical victory. All 3 approaches failed spectacularly. Mali's team lost 60% of their defensive assets within the first 20 minutes. Krafnog's berserkers managed to ram 1 enemy cruiser before being obliterated by crossfire. Quintara's methodical retreat saved more civilians but left the mining facilities completely destroyed. Throughout the entire simulation, Amy sat at a corner terminal, ostensibly managing supply requests and evacuation logistics. She barely seemed to be paying attention to the tactical displays, occasionally glancing up when explosions lit up the holographic battlefield. Typical human approach, Commander Vex Han muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Hide behind logistics while real warriors fight the battles. Perhaps they lacked the courage for actual combat, suggested Qthar, his Vorthan pride practically oozing from every word. Even some of the Kelthaxians chuckled, which for their species was practically a philosophical debate about human worthiness. Amy continued taking notes on her paper pad, completely ignoring the commentary about her species' supposed cowardice. Her expression remained neutral, almost bored, as if watching fellow candidates fail catastrophically was just another day at the office. I had to wonder what exactly she was writing down there. Admiral Drohorn's compound eyes gleamed with what I could only describe as sadistic satisfaction as he watched the simulation results scroll across the main display. 3 teams, 3 spectacular failures, and enough virtual casualties to populate a small moon. Disappointing, he clicked, his mandibles creating that sound Vorthans make when they're about to make everyone's life significantly worse. Perhaps a more complex scenario will reveal actual competence. The holographic environment shifted, and suddenly we were staring at the Tridian system crisis. 3 planets under simultaneous attack, supply lines stretched across hostile space, and resource shortages that would make a Ferengi accountant weep. Oh, and just to make things interesting, each team had to coordinate their defense while competing for the same limited reinforcements. This scenario, Drohorn announced with entirely too much pleasure, represents the kind of multi-front warfare that has historically determined the fate of entire civilizations. You have 48 hours of simulated time to achieve victory conditions on at least 2 of the 3 worlds. I watched the team leaders' faces shift from confidence to concern to barely concealed panic. This wasn't just difficult. This was the kind of nightmare scenario that military academies used to teach cadets about the concept of acceptable losses. Commander Mali immediately started deploying his forces across all 3 fronts, trying to maintain some presence everywhere. Classic human mistake, really spreading yourself too thin instead of concentrating overwhelming force at decisive points. General Kraftnog took the opposite approach, massing his entire fleet at the most heavily defended planet and preparing for one glorious suicidal charge. Because apparently, when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail that needs to be smashed into oblivion. Judge Quintara chose the methodical path, establishing supply depots and communication networks before committing to any major engagements. Sensible, calculated, and probably doomed to fail due to time constraints. Within the first 6 hours of simulated combat, things went from bad to catastrophic. Mali's scattered forces were being picked apart piecemeal. Kraftnog's berserkers had managed to capture 1 planet but lost 70% of their fleet doing it. Quintara's careful planning meant her forces were still getting organized while enemy fleets were already bombarding civilian targets. The blame game started almost immediately. If Team Quintara would share some of their medical supplies, we could maintain our offensive. Mali shouted across the command center. Medical supplies? Kraftnog roared back. What we need are more warriors, not more ways to patch up the wounded. Perhaps if either of you had bothered with proper reconnaissance, Quintara replied with icy Zephyrian dignity, we wouldn't be having supply shortages in the first place. Meanwhile, Amy continued sitting at her logistics terminal, occasionally typing something into her datapad and making more notes on that mysterious paper notepad. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here were 3 supposedly brilliant military minds arguing about resources while completely ignoring the person actually managing them. That's when Quartermaster Moran decided to get involved. This gruff old Tellurian had been running supply operations since before most of us were hatched, and his patience for incompetence was about as thin as vacuum-frozen atmosphere. All right, that's enough. Moran's gravelly voice cut through the arguing like a plasma cutter through hull plating. You 3 want to know why your supply lines are failing, asked the human. She's been tracking every bolt, bullet, and bandage for the past 6 hours. Every head in the amphitheater turned toward Amy's corner. She looked up from her notepad with an expression of mild surprise, as if she hadn't expected anyone to actually notice what she was doing. "Oh," she said, and I nearly fell out of my chair. Those were the first words I'd heard her speak since arriving at the seminar. Her voice was, well, disappointingly normal. No dramatic accent, no intimidating growl, just a regular human voice with maybe a hint of amusement. "You want to know about the supply situation?" Amy continued, setting down her stylus and looking directly at the 3 team leaders. "Because honestly, watching you 3 argue about resources while ignoring basic logistics has been more entertaining than most comedy programs." Commander Molly straightened up, clearly offended. "We've been managing our supplies perfectly adequately." Amy actually smiled at that, and something about her expression made my scales tingle with unease. "Commander Molly," she said, her tone remaining conversational, "you've allocated 60% of your medical supplies to planets with the lowest casualty rates, while your heavy combat zones are running out of trauma kits. You're also shipping energy weapons to worlds that don't have compatible power generators." Molly's face went through several interesting color changes. General Kraftnog. Amy continued, turning to the Kelthaxian berserker, "Your glorious charge worked because you committed every transport, fighter and assault ship to one battle. Unfortunately, you've now got 50,000 ground troops on a conquered planet with exactly 0 ways to supply them. They'll be eating their own boots within a week." Kraftnog's battle axe actually trembled in his grip. And Judge Quintara, Amy's attention shifted to my fellow Zephyrian. "Your methodical approach is textbook perfect for a scenario with unlimited time. But while you've been establishing supply depots, the enemy has been establishing mass graves." The amphitheater fell completely silent. Even Admiral Drohorn's mandibles stopped clicking. "The thing is," Amy said, standing up for the first time since the exercise began, "I've been running parallel calculations for optimal resource distribution across all 3 scenarios. You know, just for fun. And I have to say, watching 3 separate teams make the exact same mistakes their species always make has been absolutely fascinating from an anthropological perspective." She picked up her datapad and walked toward the main tactical display, her footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. "Would you like to see what actually efficient logistics looks like, or should I go back to my corner and let you continue this very expensive learning experience?" I realized then that every single person in that room was staring at the quiet human with a mixture of shock, confusion, and what might have been the beginning of respect, or terror. With humans, it was sometimes hard to tell the difference. Admiral Drohorn's 4 arms moved in what I recognized as the Vorthan gesture for profound interest mixed with impending doom. Not a combination you see every day, but then again, this entire seminar had been full of surprises. "Very well, human," he said, his voice carrying just enough challenge to make the air crackle with tension. "Since you seem so confident in your anthropological observations, perhaps you would care to demonstrate these superior logistics under actual pressure." The holographic environment shifted one final time, and I felt my respiratory system skip a beat. The massacre at Helix Station materialized around us in all its horrifying glory. One small defensive platform, minimal supplies, 50,000 enemy ships converging from all vectors. The kind of scenario military historians use to explain why certain battles become synonyms for hopeless. "The parameters are simple," Drohorn announced with obvious satisfaction. "Hold the station for 72 hours. No reinforcements. No evacuation. No retreat. Failure means the complete destruction of 3 million civilian refugees in the nearby transport convoy." I watched the color drain from every face in the amphitheater. This wasn't just impossible, this was mathematically, physically, and tactically absurd. 50,000 ships against one station? That wasn't a battle, that was target practice. Commander Molly stared at the tactical display for exactly 30 seconds before shaking his head. "There's no conventional solution. We'd need to evacuate immediately and accept the loss of the convoy." General Kraftnog's response was more dramatic. He raised his battle axe above his head and roared, "Then we die with honor." A glorious final stand that will be remembered in the halls of warriors forever. Judge Quintara's analysis was more clinical but equally pessimistic. The mathematics are clear. Even if we achieve perfect tactical efficiency, we lack the firepower to engage more than a fraction of the enemy fleet. Honorable surrender might preserve some lives. The entire room buzzed with dejected agreement. Honorable defeat, glorious last stands, acceptable losses, the usual menu of military euphemisms for "we're completely screwed." That's when Amy raised her hand. Not dramatically. Not with any grand gesture or attention-grabbing flourish. Just a simple, polite raising of the hand, like a student asking permission to visit the refreshment station. "Excuse me," she said, her voice still carrying that same conversational tone that had dismantled 3 military strategies. "Would it be possible for me to present an alternative approach?" The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the station's atmospheric recyclers humming in the walls. Admiral Drohorn's compound eyes focused on her with laser precision. "You believe you have a solution to an impossible scenario?" "Well," Amy said, walking toward the tactical display with that same unhurried pace, "impossible is a very strong word. Unconventional might be more accurate." She stopped in front of the holographic fleet deployment and studied it for a moment, her head tilted slightly as if she were examining an interesting puzzle rather than facing certain annihilation. "The thing about overwhelming numerical superiority," she began, "is that it creates its own set of problems. Coordination becomes exponentially more difficult. Communication lag increases. Command structure becomes unwieldy. And most importantly, large formations make very predictable targets." Commander Mali frowned. "But we still can't fight 50,000 ships with conventional tactics." Amy's smile returned, and this time it carried a distinctly predatory quality that made my scales stand on end. "Who said anything about conventional tactics?" She activated the display controls and began manipulating the tactical overlay. "Throughout human history, we've faced this exact scenario countless times. Small forces against overwhelming odds, no hope of victory through direct confrontation. You know what we learned?" The room waited in breathless silence. "We learned how to cheat." Amy's fingers danced across the control interface, highlighting terrain features, supply routes, and communication networks. First principle of asymmetric warfare: never fight the enemy where they're strong. Instead, you make them fight where they're weak. She zoomed in on the asteroid field surrounding Helix Station. 50,000 ships need massive coordination to avoid colliding with each other in confined space. So we collapsed their formation by making the space even more confined. Her plan unfolded like a deadly flower. Targeted mining charges to fragment asteroids into debris fields. False communication signals to disrupt enemy coordination. Holographic projectors to create phantom defensive installations. And then the piece de resistance, using the enemy's own weapons against each other through carefully orchestrated misdirection. "You want them to shoot at decoys," Judge Quintara said, her crystalline features reflecting dawning comprehension. "I want them to shoot at each other," Amy corrected. "In confusion in large formations leads to friendly fire incidents. Especially when their targeting systems are being fed false data about weapon signatures and fleet positions." General Kraftnog's grip on his battle axe loosened slightly. "This is not honorable combat." "No," Amy agreed cheerfully, "it's effective combat." "There's a difference." The simulation began, and what followed was the most beautiful disaster I had ever witnessed. Amy's plan unfolded with clockwork precision. Enemy ships blundered into debris fields, fired on their own forces, and generally turned their overwhelming numerical advantage into a liability of epic proportions. Within 6 hours, the 50,000 ship armada had been reduced to confused, scattered remnants fleeing the system. Total friendly casualties 0. Enemy casualties, roughly 30,000 ships, most destroyed by their own allies. The amphitheater remained silent for a full minute after the simulation ended. Finally, Admiral Drohorn spoke, his voice carrying a note I'd never heard from a Vorthan war master before. That was he paused, searching for words, absolutely horrifying. Amy returned to her seat and picked up her notepad. Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. I realized then that we had all been thinking about warfare completely wrong. While we focused on honor, glory, and conventional tactics, humans had been perfecting the art of making their enemies defeat themselves. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. And it was absolutely, undeniably effective. The stunned silence stretched on for what felt like several geological ages. I could practically hear the collective sound of military doctrines crumbling across 36 different species. Even the Kelthaxian berserkers had stopped flexing, which in my experience meant they were either deeply impressed or having existential crises about the nature of honorable combat. Admiral Drohorn was the first to recover, though recover might be too generous a term. His forearms moved in agitated patterns while his compound eyes remained fixed on Amy like she was some kind of dangerous artifact that might explode if handled incorrectly. Human, he said, his voice carrying the kind of careful respect usually reserved for unexploded ordnance. I must know your military background. What campaigns have you served in? Which tactical academies trained you? Under which commanders did you learn these strategies? Amy looked up from her notepad where she'd been writing something that was probably either profound tactical observations or a grocery list. With humans, you really never could tell. Oh, I'm not military, she said with that same casual tone she'd used to obliterate 50,000 enemy ships. I'm an anthropologist. Dr. Amy Kowalski, University of Terra, Department of Xenological Studies. I specialize in cross-species behavioral patterns in conflict situations. If the silence had been profound before, it now reached depths that would have impressed deep space vacuum. Commander Mali's jaw actually dropped open. General Kraftnog's battle axe clattered to the floor. Judge Quintara's crystalline features went through a spectrum shift that indicated severe cognitive dissonance. An anthropologist, Admiral Drohorn, repeated slowly, as if the words might make more sense if he processed them at reduced speed. That's right, Amy confirmed, flipping through her notepad. I've been attending military seminars across the galaxy for the past 8 months, studying how different species approach tactical problems. It's fascinating research, really. You're all so predictable. Commander Vexhan's scales rattled in indignation. Predictable? We represent the finest military traditions of our respective civilizations. Exactly my point, Amy said, her tone remaining infuriatingly pleasant. Traditions, honor codes, established doctrines. You all fight the same way your ancestors fought, just with better technology. Drakmari always seek decisive engagements. Vorthans always prioritize careful planning. Kelthaxians always choose direct assault. Zephyrians always analyze everything to death before acting. She gestured toward the tactical display, where the simulation results still glowed like an accusation. Meanwhile, humans survived by being adaptable. We didn't have the luxury of honor codes when saber-toothed predators were trying to eat us. We couldn't afford traditional tactics when other tribes outnumbered us 50-1. We learned to be unpredictable, opportunistic, and yes, ruthless when survival was at stake. Amy closed her notepad and stood up, addressing the entire amphitheater. You've all been fighting by rules that your enemies know and can plan against. Humans write new rules for every engagement, then change them halfway through when the old ones stop working. Judge Quintara found her voice first. But surely there must be some code of honor, some principles that govern warfare? Amy's smile returned, and it was perhaps the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen on a supposedly peaceful academic. Our only principle is winning, she said. Everything else is negotiable. The implications of that statement hit the room like a kinetic bombardment. Every military mind present began recalculating everything they thought they knew about human capabilities, human intentions, and human limitations. Amy walked back to her corner seat and did something that somehow made the entire situation even more surreal. She pulled out a sandwich. an actual physical sandwich wrapped in some kind of primitive packaging material, and began eating it while watching the rest of us process what had just happened. Of course, she said between bites, this is just theoretical research. Humans are very peaceful these days. We much prefer diplomatic solutions to military ones. The sandwich crunched loudly in the continued silence. I found myself wondering how many other peaceful human anthropologists were out there, quietly studying alien military doctrines and cataloging our weaknesses. How many seminars, war games, and tactical exercises had they observed? How much did they really know about our capabilities, our limitations, our blind spots? And more importantly, what were they planning to do with all that information? As the seminar began to break up, with military officers from across the galaxy suddenly very eager to return to their home systems and review their defensive strategies, Amy packed up her notepad and prepared to leave. "Excuse me, Dr. Kowalski," I found myself saying, unable to resist my curiosity. "What's your next research project?" She paused at the doorway and looked back with that same mild, pleasant expression that had just revolutionized galactic military thinking. "Oh, next week I'm attending the Economic Warfare Seminar on Proxima Station," she said cheerfully. "I'm particularly interested in how different species approach resource manipulation and market disruption. That should be quite educational." And with that, she walked out, leaving behind a room full of the galaxy's finest military minds, all wondering the same thing. What exactly had we been underestimating about the quiet species from that little blue planet? I had a feeling we were about to find out.